Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Speak to Sadiq. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, takes your calls.
3 minutes after 10 is the time. Let us begin in Leeds before heading toot sweet down to London, because John is in Leeds and he begins this morning's entertainments with this text from God's own county. Hi James, many reasons to be cheerful today. Perhaps the UK and the USA have had enough of geniuses for now. We may discuss Dominic Cummings a little later in the programme, but we have more important matters before us, because the Mayor of London is here for his monthly visit to the studio and his monthly swoop through our switchboard. Sadiq Khan, hello.
Good morning. Good to be back at LBC at Speak to Sadiq.
Shall we reflect briefly upon political events? We spoke already about the American election situation, but if you could give us some thoughts on Donald Trump's continuing refusal to recognise the most simple tenets of reality, and also the legacy, if that's not too pompous a word, of Dominic Cummings.
Look, when I was growing up, I played lots of sports and quite competitive sports, and my coaches and teachers taught me basic lessons.
How good were you? What was your thing?
Pretty good.
What was your mojo?
Surrey made a huge mistake and failed me at trials to be a cricketer for Surrey.
That's a sliding doors moment, isn't it? There you go. Sorry, I interrupted you.
But one of the things that we learn, whether it's boxing, tennis, football, cricket, was be magnanimous in victory, be dignified in defeat. And it's a lesson I've taken with me when I was a lawyer and a politician. And I just tell you this, James, and for those of you listeners who aren't aware of American politics, if you get a chance, just look at the letter President Bush wrote to President Clinton. When you get a chance, look at the speech Al Gore made in 2000 when he was gutted, but he accepted the defeat from the court in relation to the Florida count. Look at Jimmy Carter's concession in 1980 when he lost the election. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote 4 years ago and in a dignified way and a graceful way and a classy way accepted defeat. And you compare and contrast Donald Trump. And I asked this question rhetorically. It's a question I posed to an interviewer when I was interviewed by American TV is, are you surprised?
That's the question.
And, over the last 4 years, we've had a president of, in my view, one of the greatest countries in the world, if not the greatest country other than ours. Many of us revere and love America, the politics, the culture, the music, the arts, politicians, real and fictional. They've been a beacon for democracy and hope. And here we have, for the last 4 years, a president filled with hatred, filled with a politics of division, turning people against each other, from banning Muslims from 7 countries going to America, from separating children from their parents on the Mexican border, from withholding funding to clinics that allow women to choose what happens to their bodies, to have policies that are anti the LGBTQ plus community, to withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, to wanting to withdraw from the World Health Organization and so forth. And I'm just really excited that we'll finally have a president of the USA that we can meaningfully say we want to have a special relationship with.
And back in London, Dominic Cummings has gone. Amazing, really. You'd thought he'd want to be around to get all the bouquets and truckloads of praise and congratulation on the rip-roaring success that Brexit is about to be.
The thing is, some people say that this is a frivolous story. It really isn't. This is a matter of public interest. Why do I say that? We this week passed, I'm afraid, the number of 50,000 families grieving having lost their loved one due to the COVID pandemic. In less than 30 working days, we will be ending the transition period and properly leaving the European Union. We have the worst economic figures of any country in the G7, the worst number of excess deaths, and we have the most incompetent cabinet in my lifetime. And I lived through Margaret Thatcher, John Major, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, David Cameron, Theresa May, and a government run not just by Boris Johnson but 2 unelected advisors, Dominic Cummings and Lee Cain. And at a time they should be focused on this pandemic, on Brexit, on our economy, they literally are rats in a sack, vying for the top job at a time when they should be focused. And that perfectly illustrates the chaos at the heart of our government.
Well, we have the vaccine delivery now, regardless of what may have gone wrong in pandemic management thus far, and we have the end of the transition period in, I think, 33 working days. I don't think it would be hyperbole to describe these as the biggest logistical and leadership challenges we've faced since the Second World War, and the government appears to be embarking upon a circular firing squad.
But the reason why this is important, James, is unlike normal times where you've got real heavyweight figures in the cabinet, you've got first amongst equals, collective cabinet responsibility. That isn't the case anymore. You've got a bunch of lightweights in cabinet deliberately appointed because they won't say boo to a goose. And so in these circumstances, a prime minister is almost presidential. And we've got a prime minister who is semi-detached at best. And his two key advisors who basically run the show are rats in a sack. You mentioned a circular firing squad, but it really is chaos at the heart of government. And that means that the confidence that we should be having in the logistics, as you referred to in relation to the vaccine, in relation to the possibility of either a no-deal Brexit or a flimsy deal Brexit, which would be chaotic for jobs, businesses and their economy, is something we should all worry about.
Let's have a look at some of the work you've been doing with the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Cressida Dick. She is due to announce later today that the force remains unfree of racism or discrimination. Plans to improve are afoot. What can we expect to see in this race action plan?
Well, the first thing I say on the basis of my last 4.5 years as mayor of this great city is we have the best police force in the world of any large city, but it's not perfect. And what's clear to me is, like many other institutions in our city, from the health service to the education service to the court system to the media, including politics, the Met Police Service isn't free from racism, discrimination and bias. And what we've done is use the opportunity provided by the awful killing of George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement, and evidence of the disproportionate nature that COVID has affected Black, Asian, minority ethnic communities to speak to and listen to communities across London, more than 400 Black Londoners, individuals, organisations, community activists, and not prepare another review with recommendations that aren't going to be implemented, but actions in an action plan the police are fully signed up to, the community fully buy into, and we're hoping to see over the course of the next few weeks, months and years, rapid change in our police service. So Black Londoners who currently haven't got the trust and confidence in our police service they should have, will have increased confidence in our police service.
And that's the point, isn't it? It's about whether or not politics addresses the problems or the perceptions, because stop and search is one of the most loaded phrases in the political lexicon. And certainly during my years on LBC, I've moved from being very comforted by the fact that I can fill up a switchboard with white people insisting that black people have got a chip on their shoulder or that disproportionate stop and search is justified, to discovering through being exposed to other people's lived experiences that, for example, you're 6 times more likely to be stopped while driving, which can't be justified or explained using any of the usual tropes. So you're trying to, and this might be your legacy, you want a police service in London that people of colour do not look at with suspicion and disappointment.
But spot on. But the reason why it should affect your white callers who ring into the switchboard is because it affects all of us. Why do I say that? If you, as a Black Londoner, haven't got confidence in the police service and you're the victim of crime, and because you lack confidence, you don't cooperate with the police, that person who committed a criminal act against you won't be caught. Similarly, if you witness a crime and you're a Black Londoner, but you don't want to cooperate with the police because you lack trust and confidence, that person will get away with it and continue committing criminal acts, and you could be the victim of that act. But thirdly, if as a Black Londoner you don't want to join the police service because you lack trust and confidence, we can't have a police service that better reflects our society and we can meaningfully police by consent. So actually, it affects all of us. The fact that one part of our community, the black community, lacks the trust and confidence that the rest of us have with the police.
Speaking of trust and confidence, let us head towards the phones with no further ado, and we'll begin in Paddington, where David awaits. David, you're through to the Mayor.
Oh, good morning, Mayor. Could you tell us, on LBC 2 days ago, Theo Usherwood reported that there are 2 parallel cycle lanes running the entire length of Park Lane from south to north, creating gridlock there every rush hour. Could you tell us, will you now close the obvious elephant in the room, the empty cycle lane there? And then the second part of the question is, how much do you estimate the gridlock caused at rush hour for the whole city's cycle lane fiasco is costing the capital each day? And could I come back at the end, please?
Possibly.
Sure. Thanks, David. So firstly, good morning. Before the pandemic began, there was huge congestion in our city. And there are two main reasons why congestion increased before pandemic. One is the huge increase in private hire vehicles. It's gone from, roughly speaking, 60,000 in the 8 years before I became mayor to 120,000 on the day I became mayor. And the second reason, more and more Londoners have things delivered to their place of work or the office by delivery companies as well. Those are the two biggest factors that's led to congestion on our roads, gridlock, as you would call it. What we discovered during the pandemic is looking at those parts of the world which were ahead of us vis-a-vis the virus. Some of them had had a car-led recovery. And what that led to was not simply more congestion in their parts of the world, but issues affecting air quality, but also problems for blue light services getting through, buses getting through, and deliveries getting through as well. What we don't want to do, David, is replace one health emergency, a COVID one, with another one, poor quality air. So I support the government's measures. To try and encourage something that's different to a car-led recovery. That means encouraging people to walk, cycle, and use public transport where they can. And that's why we've made it safer for people to cycle. Before the pandemic, I was very proud. We'd trebled the amount of cycle lanes in our city from 50 kilometres when I first became mayor to more than 150 kilometres. Over the last few months, we've now increased that by an additional 90 kilometres as well. And the good news is we have 20% more people cycling than before. But over this weekend, we had a 300% increase from last weekend gone versus last year. In relation to the Park Lane cycle lane, there is a cycle lane in Hyde Park and a cycle lane on Park Lane. The reason why there's a cycle lane on Park Lane and was because we realised many cyclists weren't using the Hyde Park cycle lane because it was busy and it was shared with pedestrians as well. If the cycle lane in Park Lane isn't successful and if it's leading to additional problems, of course we'll review it, but it's only got in quite recently, so we're giving it time to bed in. We have, at the moment on our streets in London, similar levels of traffic that we had before the pandemic, and we're trying to discourage that because if there's additional cars on our roads, David, it means blue light services can't get through, it means delivery trucks can't get through, and it also means buses can't get through as well.
I've been reading around this quite a lot. It takes about 5 years, and then actually the new normal becomes uncontroversial. So, I mean, you're going to have to stick in for the long haul. But I just want to clarify precisely what you have control over. So, where I live in the London Borough of Hounslow, it's practically civil war on the streets at the moment, with people trying to prevent workmen from putting in new bollards and barriers. And these are magnificent or infernal, depending on your point of view, plant pots that have been stuck on the end of roads that people have been driving up and down for 20 or 30 years. How much of it is on you?
Well, 95% of the roads in our city, 95% are controlled by our 32 boroughs and the City of London Corporation. 5% are controlled by TfL. We try and work with the boroughs. The boroughs are trying to do right by their residents. They understand the consequences of air quality and pollution on their residents. You've raised a really important point about the new normal. Waltham Forest is a good example. Waltham Forest 4 years ago introduced what were called then mini Hollands. Very, very controversial. They're now hugely successful. The businesses in that borough are benefiting hugely because more pedestrians and more cyclists leads to better footfall and better business for those independent resellers and those businesses as well. And all I'd say to people like David, who currently are very anti people walking and cycling, is let your councils know any particular issues you have. They'll try and tweak them where they can. But I'm confident that over the course of the next few weeks and months and definitely years, we will try our best to avoid a car-led recovery to take action on issues like air quality, carbon dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, and other issues caused by what David called gridlock.
You didn't put a figure on, as David asked, on what the economic impact of current gridlock might have been.
So there is a figure, and I apologise I don't have it with me, for the economic cost of congestion. And one of the things we're keen to avoid is additional congestion caused by lack of space. London doesn't have big motorways and carriageways in most of our city. We've got 2-lane roads, and so additional cars on our roads will cause gridlock, and we'll try to avoid additional cars by providing attractive alternatives. That's walking, cycling, using public transport.
Thank you very much indeed. David, I'm going to crack on. I'm sure you understand why. Colette is in Enfield. Colette, you're through to the Mayor.
Good morning, James. Good morning,
Good morning,
Mayor.
Colette.
As a member of the black community, I look all the time at the race equality unit statistics in order to make any argument that there is a difference in terms of policing to the white community and the black community. in light of the fact that Cressida Dick has always stated quite emphatically that the term institutional racism is unhelpful, the question that's raised in my mind is what has made her change her mind? And in fact, have you imposed the race action plan on Cressida Dick and her service?
Colette, that's a really good question you asked. The answer is no. And the reason why I'm confident about this action plan is we've worked incredibly hard, Colette, with communities across London, and particular black communities, I don't apologise for that at all, with the police. One of the things I've learned, Colette, over the last few years, both, as a parliamentarian, as a minister, but also somebody who used to be a human rights lawyer, is the most successful and effective way to bring about change is to work with organisations rather than against them. And by the way, I don't single out the police. It's really important that we recognise that many institutions across our city have issues to do with racism, bias and discrimination, and they're not free from them. I hope, Colette, you'll welcome the Commissioner's statement today and her response today. This action plan isn't a report that will gather dust on a shelf full of recommendations. It's an action plan full of actions, and they start straight away. So today the Commissioner has confirmed that we will now only be recruiting police officers from London. Why is that important, Colette? Because it can mean we can make the police service look more like the city it seeks to police. At the moment, although I'm really proud, I've managed to increase the number of black, Asian, minority officers in our police service from 13% when I became mayor to 15%. We've increased it by an additional 1,000 police officers since I became mayor. It is still the case, Colette, and you know this, it doesn't quite look like our police service. So within the next 2 years, Colette, we hope that our new recruits will jump from about 19% black, Asian, minority ethnic to 40%, but also we're going to specifically approach black Londoners to ask them to join the police service, and I've put aside some money to do some outreach work there as well. But it really is an example of the senior leadership in the police getting it, and we should applaud that rather than criticising them.
It's 20 minutes after 10. You're listening to Speak to Sadiq on LBC with me, James O'Brien, as I bid farewell to Colette, hoping that she goes away satisfied. It, of course, frees up a phone line that you could use yourself, 0345 6060 973. James, I'm sorry, and I know you won't tell him, but as far as the roads go, the mayor is full of, and that's a word I'm not prepared to say on the radio, and that's from Mark, who's still stuck in the same traffic. It's going to be, a tough mountain to climb, this, isn't it? The state of the roads. It is something that many people are very, very cross about.
Sure, but what Mark and David can't pretend are things were hunky-dory back in February. And that's this thing about people just reflecting on what life was really like before the pandemic, what it was like during the pandemic when it was in total lockdown, and what it's like now. And what people try and do is find simple solutions to the challenges they face. And I'm afraid I speak on a regular basis to people whose trade involves using our roads, whether they're plumbers, mechanics, those who work in the blue light services, and it's never been perfect. And what we're trying to do is to avoid additional cars going on the road that has an impact on traders who need there to be decent passageway on the roads to get from job to job, as plumbers, electricians, mechanics and others need to do.
I was strolling up Piccadilly yesterday doing my essential shopping at Fortnum and Mason, and it struck me for the first time that the black cabs, they were sort of buzzing around as usual, one of the lifebloods of this magnificent city. And, really fighting over scraps would be the only phrase that sprung to mind. Is there anything you can do to help them?
Well, black cabs face a similar problem to TfL, fewer passengers,
yes.
Right? And the fewer passengers are because of lockdown. So what we're trying to do is make it more attractive to use a black cab. And one of the ways we've done that is we've opened up all our bus lanes to black cabs, but also we've made them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for buses and black cabs. Why is that, James? Because it gives you another reason to use a black cab or a bus, because they will flow through the traffic that Mark and David complain about, because those bus lanes should only be used by black cabs.
That's an important line, isn't
lanes.
it? Because that it might diffuse some of the criticism and the anger that's out there if black cabs were more widely perceived as a corrective to congestion rather than a contributor to congestion.
I'm somebody who's a big supporter of
black cab drivers are mostly furious with you about the closure of roads and the prioritisation of cycle lanes.
Black cabs have been furious with every mayor in the history of mayors. You speak to Boris Johnson and Ken Livingstone and ask them to show you the scars they've got from the black cab community. But that shouldn't take away from my respect for them. They do an important job.
Absolutely.
They're really struggling. By the way, they were struggling before I became mayor, and private hire vehicles and the ease with which one can become a private hire vehicle driver versus the difficulties becoming a black cab driver, the challenges with the knowledge, the investment in the black cab. But I'd say to listeners who've not used a black cab recently, particularly if you're in a wheelchair, these are the only vehicle which compare and contrast to PHVs, which are fully accessible to disabled wheelchairs. They will get out and help you. Many of them are mechanised. Many of them now are clean. More than almost 5,000 electric black cabs across our city. They take cards. You've got cash, don't worry about it as well. And they really know this city
you get
like the back of their hand.
Free political commentary if
well,
LBC's
don't
not
listen.
working.
That's the one thing. Don't listen. Don't always listen to the politics of a black cab driver.
Broad
That aside,
very unfair. They are there for our benefit, I suppose, is the point. But the problem that you can't fix, or no one can fix at the moment, is the shortage of passengers on the pavements. Let's go to Danny, who's in Camden. Danny, you're through to the Mayor.
Yeah, hello. I live in Croydon. Basically, I want to ask the Mayor's opinion on what he thinks of another Labour-run council going bankrupt.
When you say another, what was the other one?
Just give me one. Just give me one more, Danny.
When you say another, what was the other one?
Yeah, I want. Well, just what he thinks on the Labour-run Croydon council going bankrupt.
So it's not another one though. I just want to get my ducks in a row.
TfL's bankrupt as well while that man's running it, so...
Yes, OK.
You want to ask the question?
Yes, no, absolutely. So there aren't any other, just to be clear, because I was worried I might have missed one.
No, but to be fair to Danny, some people are making this mistake of reading Tory propaganda. Danny, don't read it. It'll make you go blind and say stupid things. So the other council I can think of that's been made bankrupt is one called Northamptonshire, Danny. And when you get a chance, go to a search engine and check, Google is one of them, and just search who runs Northamptonshire Council, which was made bankrupt 2 years ago, to use your words, not mine. And when you refer to TfL, which is also some of the Tory propaganda, Danny, I advise you not to read. TfL hasn't been made bankrupt by me. In fact, before the pandemic, I'd managed to reduce the deficit that I inherited. The previous mayor borrowed more than £7 billion whilst he was mayor. I'm paying off his interest. And he also left me with a mess. I've reduced his deficit by more than 71%, but also I increased our cash balances by more than 13%.
All right, let's stop picking over
so, Danny, what I say to you is try and... Well, it's not his mistakes. He's reading Tory propaganda. Danny, read decent stuff and find out your facts.
And now Croydon. What's happened in Croydon and why?
So Croydon, a number of reasons why Croydon is having the problems it has. Croydon has served what's called a Section 114 notice. What that means basically is they've not got enough money in their bank to pay the outgoings they have. And there are two main reasons for this. It's 10 years of them receiving less monies from central government. Many councils rely upon monies from central government. There's been huge cuts over the last 10 years.
But all councils have faced cuts. And
additionally, additionally, there's the last year's worth of COVID issues as well. I'm afraid the bad news is Croydon won't be the last council that serves a Section 114 notice. I speak to council leaders across the country on a regular basis through the M9, the Metro 9 mayors. There are many other councils on the cusp of serving a Section 114. It's really important.
To clarify, £3.2 billion back in June was the estimate that 150 authorities of every political complexion were estimated to be looking at a shortfall.
That's nationwide, and in London it's £1.4 billion. And the bad news, Danny, is that also includes Tory councils as well.
Danny, did that touch the sides?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say you're the worst London mayor in history.
So it didn't touch the sides then, all the detail you were just given? Nothing at all? No? Danny? Beulah? Anyone? Andrew's in Lewisham. Andrew, you're through to the Mayor.
Hi, Sadiq.
Hi, Andrew.
Yesterday, Andy Burnham and Steve Rotherham publicly committed to fighting for the excluded, the people who've had no financial support. Will you join them to use your platform to take apart the arguments the government is putting forward for leaving these mistakes in place and fix the situation for 3 million people who've had nothing?
Yeah, Andrew, thanks for the question.
This is just outrageous.
Yeah. And actually, I was in touch with Andy Burnham last night and this morning, Andrew.
So what are you going to do? What can you do? What will you do?
So let me just, for those listeners that don't know what Andrew's talking about, is there are many, many people across the country, more than 3 million, who are self-employed. They're freelancers. Many of them are newly self-employed, or they could be getting some of their income from self-employed, some through being an employee. They could be receiving their monies as dividends because they're a director and so forth, or have a trading income of more than £50,000. And they've been excluded from any financial support from the government since March, and they have fallen through the cracks. And I spoke yesterday, Andrew, also with a freelancer who works in the cultural sector, And she basically is now working in a supermarket because she's got no income, and she's now left the job she had as a freelance in the cultural sector. So, Andrew, a number of things we're doing to try and persuade the government to do a U-turn on this. They've done a U-turn in relation to the furlough scheme. They've done a U-turn in relation to the lockdown. They've done a U-turn in relation to free school meals. And I think they need to do a U-turn in relation to this. So a number of things I'm doing is obviously joining forces with Keir Starmer, who was on LBC this week talking about this and actually raised this with the Prime Minister during PMQs this week. I'll be joining Andy Burnham and Steve Rotherham in a nationwide campaign to raise this issue and to make sure we put pressure on the government to change tack. Andrew, the bad news is neither Andy Burnham, Steve Rotherham, myself, or any other of the regional mayors or council leaders have the finances to give you the support financially that you desperately need. But what we do know is many people who've fallen through the cracks now can't afford to pay rent, can't afford to pay their mortgage, are worried about how they're going to make ends meet. And at a time where there's an intrinsic link between health and the economy, my concern is people inadvertently take risks with the health and isolation because they need to make ends meet and get other jobs. And that's why we're trying to get the government to understand it's a false dichotomy to choose health over wealth. The economy and this pandemic are intrinsically linked.
I got the impression, or rather I arrived at the conclusion at the first round that they'd somehow slipped through the cracks, these people, estimated to be about 3 million. It's clearly not the case that this is anomalous or accidental.
Well, I'll tell you why I reached that conclusion, and Andrew, I thought this as well, because to give the government the benefit of the doubt.
Yes, exactly.
They originally brought in the furlough scheme and the package that the Chancellor announced quickly, and the view was that was because the urgency was important. It was a blunt instrument, and over the course of time they would sort it out. And you've got respected people, Andrew, like the IFS, Paul Johnson, saying, hold on a sec, you've now announced this new scheme and it's as blunt as the old scheme, and you've not addressed the anomalies that James O'Brien's referred to. And that's why it's outrageous, Andrew, that 9 months on, they've still not recognised that there's more than 3 million people who've fallen through the cracks. And these aren't multimillionaires who don't need the support from the state. These are people who've paid their taxes, they've paid in. We need them to continue to be wealth creators, and they're not getting the support. And my concern is that they will not just fall through the cracks and lose their jobs, but also they will not be able to in the future contribute to the well-being of our country.
What do you think Rishi Sunak's motivation is? And I know we're moving into the realms of speculation, but it seems to be so at odds with what you would expect from not just a Conservative Chancellor, but from a Conservative Chancellor who clearly now has one eye on the next rung up the ladder, and yet these 3 million people, not to generalise too unduly, but you know, the entrepreneurial flair, the business men and women, the people that Conservatives often like to claim they represent most assiduously, he has categorically hung them out to dry, and I can't work out why. Can you?
Well, I'm not sure it's conspiracy, it's more incompetence, I think. And that's why it's important that Andrew is lobbying people like me to get involved in the campaign to get the government to change their mind. We do know, Andrew, that the Chancellor's got his eye on the next job, and so that's why he will want to not be unpopular with people like you. More than 3 million.
But that makes Andrew even more confused and frustrated.
There is a prejudice, James, that some people make, that they assume everyone who is self-employed or everyone who receives their income through a dividend is doing really, really, really well.
But it's usually your lot that make that mistake, not Conservative politicians.
Well, we're learning as well, and we understand the importance of being pro-business. We understand the importance of helping wealth creators and entrepreneurs, and we understand that actually many of them are struggling, really struggling. They've used their life savings, many of them. They've borrowed from family members to make ends meet, and with no end in sight of the government getting a grip with the test, trace, isolate system. So no end in sight, people like Andrew getting back to their livelihoods. It's really important. In the meantime, they're given a bridge, a lifeline before we finally get a grip with this pandemic.
Speaking of livelihoods, you seem to be damaging mine. Jan's just switched off. She says, I'm sorry, I tried. I cannot listen to this tripe. When will the Mayor ever admit that he does get it wrong at times? Someone should write a book about being wrong, actually, Jan, now I come to think of it. What do you admit to having got wrong?
Well, Jan, if I look at the questions I've been asked this morning, I've made a list of them. I'm sorry you're not listening, Jan, but those who know Jan can pass on to her. So the issue of the excluded 3 million is Andrew's question was about the government not giving them the support they need. Danny's planted question from the Tories was about Croydon Council.
There's no way Danny was put up to that by the Tories. You are perfectly entitled to suggest that he might have swallowed Tory propaganda without chewing much, but there's no earthly way that he was put on this show by CCHQ.
The Tories aren't as wise as you think, James.
I've been doing this longer than you have.
Even Danny would accept that I don't run the 32 councils in London as much as some people would like me to do so. Colette's question is my responsibility in relation to policing, and I've talked about the action plan today that we've published in partnership with communities and the police service. Davy's question about me being responsible for all congestion in London, I addressed in relation to what we're trying to do with cycle lanes. So I'm sorry, Jan, that you've stopped listening to James O'Brien.
That's not what she asked. She's not referring specifically to this morning. I think she'd like a little bit of mea culpa from the last 4.5 years on any issue at all, and then we can clip it up and send it to her.
Oh, Jan, look, I'm really happy to talk about my record. Last year, Jan, we began more council homes than any year.
She wants to know what you've got wrong.
1983.
What have you got wrong? Nobody's perfect.
One of the things that Londoners like Jan one of the things that Londoners like Jan will need to do in May is decide if the current mayor, me, has done a better job than the last one. This isn't about how perfect or imperfect I am. It's an election between me and the other guy, and Jan will have to decide whether the other guy can do a better job than I can.
So nothing then.
I'm sure there's not been a day in my life where I've not made mistakes, but I'm not going to admit them to you when you've got Tories listening, James.
Well, we've got everybody listening. That's the whole point. We're leading Britain's conversation. Veronica is in Fulham. Veronica, you're through to the Mayor.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Khan.
Good morning, Veronica.
Hi there. So I live in Fulham. I live right by the river. Obviously, we've got the massive Hammersmith Bridge issue. I just want to know, how much input do you have into this whole issue? I want to know who's meant to foot the bill. We've been told, some people say it's TfL, some people say it's Hammersmith and Fulham Council. It's an absolute nightmare. No, I don't own a business nearby. Doesn't mean you're not affected if you don't have a business. The gridlock is constant. It's slightly quieter now because we're in lockdown, but Wandsworth and Putney Bridges, absolute gridlock. The increase in air pollution is concerning. My son plays football in Barn Elms, which is directly opposite us. Would normally be a 5-10 minute route.
I'm going to edit you slightly, Veronica, and I'm going to translate your question roughly as what the heck is going on regarding Hammersmith Bridge.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
So Veronica, thanks for your question. I know it's awful in that part of London. I know it very well. So let me tell you what we're doing. So we have now started a procurement process to get a temporary ferry running there as soon as possible, Veronica, because whilst we're sorting out money from the government to get the bridge fixed, we need to organise a crossing for your son and others who need to get across from one side to the other side. So that's been procured. We hope to have some good news on that very soon. Secondly, to answer your question directly, the bridge is owned by the council, but the council can't afford to pay the £140 million to get it fixed so it can take vehicles like it did before, and nor can TfL for the reasons that you know in relation to the COVID pandemic. So we've asked the government on 3 occasions, we've given them shovel-ready projects to get this bridge back and running. So far they've said no. But people like you, Veronica, lobbying the government is making a difference. So we're trying to get them to agree in the short term to agree, in addition to the ferry, a stabilisation of the bridge, so at least people can walk across it, cycle across it, and it can be and ships can go underneath it, because as you know, there's a big concern about the safety of vessels passing underneath it as well.
Ships can go. I never know whether this one for mystery hour. What's the difference between a ship and a boat? I think you mean boats.
I mean,
you'd be unlikely to get a ship on the Hammersmith
canoes.
Canoes.
I'm sorry, Veronica. If you're a ship
maritime terminology, for
those maritime experts, I apologise for my language.
When might Veronica's boy be able to actually get to
the ferry? Pretty cool. So Veronica, the procurement's gone out. And so it depends who bids for that contract. And as soon as we get the bids in, we'll choose the best one. And as soon as that's signed off, that can start pretty soon. There are concerns, Veronica, just so you know. I'm not an expert on maritime, but there are issues with the tide and tidal issues. And so once they're sorted out, as soon as possible.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. I know that bit of the river very well, and there's only certain parts of the day when the water's high enough for you to get a boat from one side.
See, I do know something about the water
to the other.
Well done. And the ships.
Any thoughts on who should get the vaccine first?
I think we should rely upon the experts' advice. Those who are the most vulnerable go first, and I think their advice is by age, for obvious reasons, or those who work in a frontline job like the NHS or care homes should go first, or transport should go first.
Politicians?
This is a really good point. We've discovered, James, we've done some work, hesitancy amongst some communities who aren't confident about taking the vaccine. And what we've been told is if they see people that they respect or in positions of power and influence taking the vaccine, that may give them confidence. So we're actually on a serious point looking into what opinion formers could take the vaccine to give them confidence so they're not hesitant taking the vaccine. In the past, I've taken the flu vaccine, not just because I need it.
Addresses both disinformation and what you might describe as healthier scepticism.
Absolutely right.
I want to squeeze in one more question. Simon is in Reading. Simon, you're through to the Mayor.
Good morning. I was just wondering how concerned you are about the amount of huge amounts of money leaving the City of London and heading towards Europe post-Brexit, and what, if anything, you can do to try and encourage more investment here. What are your plans to try and mitigate against that?
So, Simon, just to underscore your really important point, put aside for a second Brexit and the fact that 10% of the financial services have already left. We this year lost £10.9 billion because of the collapse of domestic and international tourism. So your question you raise is at the fore of my mind. The mantra we have now in City Hall is jobs, 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 for the reasons that you allude to. So we're doing lots. We're still trying to persuade the government to get a decent deal with the European Union rather than no deal or a flimsy deal. I was disappointed by the Chancellor's announcement this week about equivalence. It's great we've got equivalence with EU, but it basically means that no longer are we rule makers, we're simply taking the rules from the EU because we need to make sure our financial services can do business with colleagues across Europe. The key thing, Simon, we're seeking to do is to make sure, and it goes to a question Andrew raised in relation to freelancers, we can't afford to lose the unique ecosystem of our city. One of the reasons, Simon, people come to London is not just because of our world-leading finance, professional services, but it's the ecosystem, culture, tech, universities, tourism, our museums, our galleries, our restaurants, etc. And that's why we've now got a recovery board set up with the Chair of London Council and myself, and we have 9 missions about how we go forward with a roadmap to recovery, because we're really keen to make sure that we use this period where we're in the lockdown to start making plans for us to build back better. It's not just a trite three-word slogan, but it's making sure that the new normal continues to make London an attractive place for people to invest, but also we try and make sure we have future-proof jobs. And one of the opportunities, Simon, created by the election of Joe Biden is rather than him walking away from the Paris Climate Change Agreement, he's going to sign back to that. We've got COP26, which is a climate change conference coming to our country, Glasgow, and we're hoping, Simon, to pivot to future-proof green jobs and attract those to London, but other parts of the country as well through London.
Final question by tweet from Neil. He says, is the Mayor concerned about the recently announced challenge of Dr. Gammons of UKIP in the forthcoming mayoral elections?
Look, I take all candidates.
This isn't a joke. I mean, you know that better than I do, but some people listening may not realise that the UKIP candidate, I don't know why people find this funny, but his name is Gammons. I don't know about where the doctor comes from, but the surname is definitely Gammons.
Look, one of the joys of democracy is that Londoners will get to choose in May who the next mayor is. I treat all opponents with the courtesy and respect they deserve. I take them all seriously, and whoever loses on the election in May should accept the result as long as it's a fair election. I'm looking forward to, hopefully, beating Dr. Gammon and other challenges.
Gammons, plural.
I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
Gammons, plural. Good luck to him.
And we'll let the post-match analysis be done by these 2 texts. One says from Robert, please put more Mayor haters on. It's brilliant listening. While Joe in Blackheath says, I'm a Labour Party member and strongly support the party. Sadly, the Mayor has been hopeless and repeatedly failed to deliver on London's priorities.
Is that Sean Bailey?
That's Joe in Blackheath.
Okay.
So you can't accuse all of your critics of being Tory stooges.
No.
Well, no, you really can't. So, just for a start,
it's been an absolute pleasure,
always.
James. And can
Until
I just say to all those callers who read Tory propaganda, stop. It's bad for your health.
Yeah, well, there's plenty of reasons for criticising you that are not born of Tory propaganda, and we shall continue to cite them next week. In the meantime, may I recommend a new book, How Not to Be Wrong? It's rather splendid reading on admitting your own historical errors. Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, many thanks indeed. Dominic Ellis is here now with the headlines.
Sadiq Khan has told LBC he's determined to address concerns about how police powers disproportionately affect black people. The Mayor of London has published figures this morning which show black people in the capital are 6 times more likely to be stopped in their vehicles than white people. The Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Dame Cressida Dick, says the force is not free of discrimination, racism or bias. The serial killer, known as the Yorkshire Ripper, has died in hospital. Peter Sutcliffe, who was 74, had contracted coronavirus in prison. He was serving a whole life term for murdering 13 women across